A Child to His Sick Grandfather by the Scottish poet and dramatist Joanna Baillie was first published in 1790 in her collection Poems, wherein it is attempted to describe certain views of nature and of rustic manners. It's written in the form of an apostrophe, a literary form often used to convey intense emotion, where the speaker directly addresses someone or something who is absent, dead, or who cannot, for whatever reason, respond. In this poignant poem, the child directly addresses his ailing grandfather, who, even though physically present, is in a weakened and dying state, thus making the communication one-sided. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, when Joanna Baillie was writing, it was common for multi-generational families, especially among poorer or rural communities, to live together, with older relatives being cared for by the younger generations. Grandparents often played significant roles in the daily lives of children, acting as caregivers, storytellers, or simply a stable presence in the household. The bond between grandfather and grandson is therefore so natural and deeply entrenched that the loss feels monumental to the child, who might not yet fully understand death but instinctively feels its impact. Baillie thus uses the perspective of a naive young boy to explore themes of grief, aging, mortality, familial bonds, and memory. The poem comprises 8 stanzas of 6 lines each, otherwise known as sestets. Each sestet features 5 lines of iambic tetrameter, di-dum, 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 e.g., Grandad, they say you're old and frail, and 1 line of iambic trimeter, di-dum, 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 e.g., I'm vexed to see you, Dad. The way this shortened line disrupts the rhythm suggests a moment of pause at the end of each stanza as the boy begins to process the distressing implications of what he is observing. Baillie rigidly adheres to this iambic rhythm throughout. Note that there is only one metrical inversion in the 3rd stanza, where an iamb, dum, is substituted for a trochee, dumdy, i.e. scant are the white hairs on your head. Additionally, most lines are end-stopped with very few instances of enjambment. Each stanza has an A, B, B, C, C rhyme scheme, where all rhymes are single or masculine, i.e. all rhymes fall on the stressed final syllable of the line. The regular rhythm, the truncated 6th line of each stanza, the end stopping and the rhyming couplets all combine to create quite a ponderous rhythm, not only evoking the solemn determination of the child to remain by his grandfather's side no matter what, but also perhaps the grandfather's irrevocable decline towards death at the end of the poem. 6 of the 8 stanzas end with the plaintive, vocative expression Dad, short for Grandad, reinforcing not only the child's emotional closeness, but also his growing sense of grief at the loss. The boy's consistent use of the term Dad for his grandfather, rather than referring to his biological father, speaks volumes about the central role the grandfather plays in his life. The grandfather appears to be the primary male figure in the child's world, perhaps even more so than his actual father. This absence of the father, while not explicitly mentioned, suggests that he may be physically or emotionally absent for some reason. By calling his grandfather Dad, the child seems to be acknowledging the man who has taken on this paternal role in his life, further emphasizing the close bond they share. The lack of any reference to the father reinforces the idea that the grandfather has been a surrogate father figure, and this may add to the child's sense of loss as he faces the reality of his grandfather's decline. The poem is written from a first-person viewpoint, I. It is, however, a direct address to the child's grandfather, so the second-person pronoun you features heavily throughout. thus creating a very personal and intimate feel. The use of the present tense gives the poem a sense of immediacy, effectively allowing the reader to experience the speaker's emotions in real time. Baillie makes a number of language choices to create a vivid portrait, not only of the grandfather, but also of the young speaker himself, who does not seem to grasp the full significance of what is happening. The child's diction is plain and simple. Baillie's use of predominantly monosyllabic words enhances her evocation of the speaker's naivety. Likewise, the development of the ideas in the poem is fairly straightforward, with the frequent use of coordinating conjunctions such as and, but, and yet, as well as the subordinating conjunction when. This reflects the boy's naivety, as his thoughts unfold simply and logically without complex subordination or abstraction. In keeping with the innocence of the child, there is also a complete lack of figurative language, such as simile and metaphor. Baillie does use a number of words, i.e. what to mean no, wheel to mean welfare, and partlet to mean hen, that would have been considered archaic even in 1790. This is therefore a deliberate choice, and suggests that Baillie perhaps wished to lend the poem a traditional tone by echoing earlier literary voices. The title, A Child to His Sick Grandfather, sets up a third-person perspective, framing the poem as an observation of a specific moment or interaction. This creates a narrative distance between the title and the intimate first-person voice within the poem. This shift in perspective makes the poem feel both universal and personal. The title sets up a general scenario, but the poem plunges into the unique emotional experience of this specific child. The poem begins with the speaker addressing his grandfather. "Grandad, they say you're old and frail." The informal and affectionate term of address, Grandad, immediately sets up the warm, close bond between the child and his grandfather. The phrase, "they say you're old and frail," subtly highlights the child's naivety and limited understanding of the grandfather's condition. The use of "they say" suggests that the child hasn't fully grasped the reality on his own, but has instead absorbed this knowledge from the conversations of adults around him. The identity of "they" remains vague, perhaps family members, neighbours, or community figures, reinforcing the idea that the child's awareness is second-hand rather than the result of personal insight. This moment is significant because it marks the beginning of the child's shift from innocence to awareness. Once the idea of the grandfather's frailty is planted in his mind, the child begins to actively observe the physical signs of his deterioration. Your stiffened legs begin to fail. Once upon a time, when he was full of strength and energy, his grandfather wouldn't need his staff or stick as a support, but would instead use it as a kind of hobby horse to give his grandson rides. Your staff no more my pony now. Now, however, the grandfather is too weak, and the boy has noticed that the stick instead supports your body bending low while back to wall you lean so sad. The grandfather is so bent over and unsteady on his feet that he's having to put a lot of his weight onto his staff, as well as use the wall to prevent himself from falling over. Not only has the boy noticed his grandfather's growing weakness, but the adjective sad also communicates that he has observed that his granddad knows too that he has become frail and is weighed down by the sense of his own mortality. Baillie heightens the sense of pathos as she ends the stanza with the little boy sorrowfully expressing his sense of worry. "I'm vexed to see you, Dad." In the second stanza, we learn how central to the little boy's life his grandfather has been. You used to smile and stroke my head and tell me how good children did. Not only has he lost a playmate, but he's also lost a nurturing figure who showed him affection and gave him moral guidance, teaching him right from wrong. The regularity of the polysyndeton here evokes the reliability and dependability of his grandfather and emphasises this protective role. It starkly contrasts with the conjunction but. But now I wot not how it be, you take me seldom on your knee. The boy is now too heavy to sit on his grandfather's lap, but he doesn't understand why. The parenthetical, I wot not how it be, I don't know why, serves as a moment of childlike reflection, expressing the speaker's confusion at the change in his grandfather's behaviour and the loss of physical affection. The stanza ends with his declaration that, yet ne'ertheless I am right glad to sit beside you, Dad. In other words, although he misses the physical bond they once shared, he still takes solace from quietly sitting near him, even though his grandfather is not giving him the amount of attention that he used to. In the third stanza, the speaker switches his attention to his grandfather's physical appearance. How lank and thin your beard hangs down, scant are the white hairs on your crown. How wan and hollow are your cheeks, your brow is crossed with many streaks. His grandfather is wasting away. His beard is no longer full and luxuriant, but is now lank and thin. The adjective lank suggests that it is lifeless and untidy. The adjective scant is another word for hardly any, and describes how the man is losing his hair. The metrical inversion in this line, in combination with anastrophe, scant are the white hairs on your crown, emphasises the word scant by placing it at the start of the line with a strong stress, drawing attention to the grandfather's physical decline. The unnatural word order also slows the rhythm, mirroring the speaker's dawning realisation of his grandfather's frailty. He now looks closely at the old man's haggard face and observes that his cheeks are wan and hollow. They are pale and sunken, and his brow or his forehead is wrinkled and creased with age and distress. Note the exclamation mark at the end of the first line, as well as the anaphoric how at the beginning of lines 1 and 3, which all emphasise the little boy's shock as he has only just now registered the extent to which his grandfather has changed. The speaker switches briefly to refer to his grandfather in the third person at the end of the stanza. But yet, although his strength be fled, I love my own old dad. This is in the way of an aside, which is not for his granddad's ears. It is as though the speaker does not wish him to hear such a dispiriting acknowledgement of his weakness. By momentarily stepping outside the direct address, the speaker expresses his private sorrow, as if trying to shield his grandfather from the painful truth of his decline. This subtle shift reinforces the child's tenderness and the depth of his unconditional love. The use of the adjective own, emphasised by its assonance with old, further underscores this idea. In the fourth stanza, the speaker concerns himself with the effect that the old man's decline has had on the tight-knit community where they live. The housewives round their potions brew, and gossips come to ask for you. And for your weal each neighbour cares, and good men kneel and say their prayers. Everyone in the community seems to be highly invested in the welfare of this man, suggesting that he is seen as a well-respected patriarchal figure. The housewives of the village busy themselves with brewing herbal potions to alleviate his suffering. Baillie's syntax here, the housewives round their potions brew, gives it a slightly incantatory feel, almost like something from a fairy tale, which could reflect the child's perception of the world. He may not fully understand the seriousness of his grandfather's condition, instead interpreting the adult's actions through a lens of youthful imagination, where brewing potions sounds more like witchcraft than medicine. In small rural communities at the time, folk remedies were often used rather than the more traditional medicine that a doctor might provide. Other women in the village, the gossips, also come to ask for or after him, presumably so that they can give everyone else an update on his condition, while all his close neighbours care for his weal or welfare. His high standing in the village and the severity of his condition is evidenced by the fact that good men kneel and say their prayers for him. And everybody looks so sad when you are ailing, Dad. Note the anaphoric polysyndeton here, which emphasises how the dying man is surrounded by love and care from diverse groups in the community. The rhetorical question that begins the 5th stanza, "You will not die and leave us then?" communicates both the boy's naivety and his despair. At his age, he still clings to the hope that everything will turn out fine, as evidenced by his disbelief that his grandfather could leave them. The child cannot fathom the possibility of death, especially since the entire village is trying to do everything they can to save him. His question reveals a state of denial, where he believes that if the right actions are taken, the outcome can be avoided. The imperative, "rouse up and be our dad again," highlights the child's desire to wake his grandfather, both physically and metaphorically, as if by sheer will he can restore the situation. The possessive pronoun "our" suggests that the grandfather is not just a personal figure to the boy, but a shared symbol of authority and love within the community. The child's desire for control is further emphasised in the lines, "When you are quiet and laid in bed, we'll doff or take off our shoes and softly tread, and when you wake we'll still be near to fill old Dad his cheer." It's as if they'll be able to change the outcome just by altering their behaviour. The 6th stanza is structured around a series of when clauses, creating a pattern of promises from the child to his grandfather. The repetition of when highlights the child's sense of duty and his firm commitment to being there for his grandfather in any circumstance. His pledges, "When through the house you shift your stand, I'll lead you kindly by the hand. When dinner's set, I'll with you bide, and I be serving by your side. And when the weary fire burns blue, I'll sit and talk with you," show that the child is willing to support his grandfather through every part of daily life, regardless of the hardship or discomfort. This reinforces the boy's desire to remain close and to fulfill his role as a caregiver, even as his grandfather's decline continues. The repetition of these conditional clauses also suggests a kind of emotional certainty. The child believes that these actions are what will save or restore the grandfather, demonstrating his naive belief in his ability to reverse the inevitable. The transferred epithet in "when the weary fire burns blue" is a subtle yet powerful metaphor for the grandfather's declining vitality. By describing the fire as weary, the child unconsciously links the tiredness of the flame to his grandfather's own exhaustion, as though both are reaching their end. A fire that burns blue typically signifies that it is burning out, just as the grandfather is nearing the end of his life. This imagery foreshadows the grandfather's imminent death, which the child in his innocence may not fully comprehend, but is clearly sensitive to on a deeper subconscious level. The weariness of the fire mirrors the weariness of the grandfather, highlighting the child's awareness of his condition, even as he clings to hope. In the final 2 stanzas, the child attempts to comfort his grandfather in the only way he knows, by telling him bedtime stories, mirroring the role the grandfather once held in his life. "I have a tale both long and good about a partlet and her brood, and greedy cunning fox that stole by dead of midnight through a hole, which slyly to the hen roost led. You love a story, Dad. This reversal of roles signifies a subtle yet poignant shift in responsibility, as the child becomes the one offering care and reassurance. The child's awareness that his grandfather now needs to be cared for and looked after marks a tacit acknowledgement of the changing dynamics within the family. In a sense, the child is unknowingly taking on the mantle of the man of the house, assuming a position of strength and responsibility that was previously the grandfather's. This passing of the baton is a key moment in the child's maturation, suggesting that he is beginning to understand the delicate balance between dependence and care. Note the dashes at the end of the 5th line of this stanza, suggesting that the boy is breaking off to perhaps touch him on the arm in order to get a response from him. In the final stanza, the boy continues to desperately rouse his grandfather with another story. This time it is a wondrous tale of men all clad in coats of mail with glittering swords. He doesn't get very far, however. The dashes indicate that he is broken off because he's noticed that his grandfather is moving his head. You nod. Rather than a signal of affirmation, however, the man is either in the process of falling asleep or dying. I think your heavy eyes begin to wink. Down on your bosom sinks your head. Note how the dashes here disrupt what has been up to this point a regular rhythm, indicating the boy's growing anxiety and uncertainty. The once hopeful storytelling is now faltering, mirroring the falling life force of his grandfather. The dashes create a sense of hesitation and fragmentation, as though the child is struggling to process what is happening in real time. The repeated use of the dashes mimic his wavering voice, as he clings to the belief that his grandfather is merely drifting into sleep rather than slipping away entirely. This subtle shift in rhythm and punctuation reinforces the poignancy of the moment, the child's innocence colliding with the inevitable reality of loss. The poem ends on the heartbreaking line, "You do not hear me, Dad." There is nothing left to be done. Ironically yet appropriately, the child's bedtime story has lulled the grandfather into his final sleep. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments section below and I'll do my best to answer them. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos on English language topics and exam techniques and English literature texts.